All right, kiddos, it's time for us to continue to work on our aquatic biomes. We'll be diving into terrestrial biomes this week as well. And we're going to also start working on our newest project, the phone app. For some of us and for some of you, I'm going to have you do that on paper because we can already see that it's not going to work out for some of us in here, and that is what it is. We've already watched this on the aquatic ecosystems. You can go back and watch that if you need to. We know that aquatic means having to do with water. I think that's something that's very well. Most of us got that correct on the quiz last week. And today we're going to really be taking a lot of notes on the marine biome. And by a lot of notes, I mean we're going to start working on our Google Docs so that can be inserted into our app that we are using. So that'll be a lot of fun to work on. Now, again, hopefully you've written this down, Anna, that the marine biome, the oceans, are the largest biomes. I would imagine that's in there because we took those notes already. So nobody should really be jotting all this down. This is in our notes. This is just review. And it's any of the regions of Earth's surface that's covered with salt water. And then that threw in another definition, Fabiana, of salt water as water that has salt in it. Not very tough, right? Pretty easy definition to go through there. And we know that the marine biome, the ocean biome, has the most biodiversity. And we know that that means many different types of plants and animals. And it makes sense that the ocean has the most biodiversity, seeing that it covers 70% of the Earth's surface. It covers the most. It makes sense that it has the most different types of life in it. You do need to know some, not every animal and plant in the ocean. You need to know some of them. And you saw that question this morning, right? When we were talking about what's most likely an animal in a freshwater system, and then they threw some animals that we know that live in the oceans in there, and it's easy to kind of bounce back and forth between those type of things. Just a few: dolphins, whales, jellyfish, the sea anemone, the clownfish, those types of things. You don't have to know them all, but you do need to know some of them as we go through the marine biome. Again, covers 70% of the Earth. Probably an important thing to understand, but no, Brandon, you do not have to memorize the 5 main oceans at all. You do not have to memorize the fact that there's 1 cup of salt per gallon of water in the ocean. Now, if you want to put that in your project, I'm really not going to get very upset with you because that is some fun facts about the ocean. 1 million species of plants and animals have been discovered, and scientists think there could be 9+ million more that we haven't discovered yet, which is kind of an insane thing to say. Like, we have discovered like 1/10 of the different living species in the ocean. It's kind of scary to think about. But then we did see in that video that we've mapped more of Mars than we have of the oceans. Which is kind of wild, right? Like, who cares what's on Mars? Like, we live here. Let's figure out what's in the stuff that lives here, right? We talked about the algae that lives in the ocean. And that marine algae, as it's going through the process of photosynthesis, is releasing oxygen into the atmosphere. And it's about roughly half of the oxygen on Earth. And that's pretty important. You can watch this one on your own. If you need to get some information from that, you can. So, Jesse, when you're doing your project today, if you want to talk a little bit about kelp, you can. It's in the ocean. It's a plant. It's one of the living things that's in the ocean. It's important information. And we remember kelp has like 4 or 5 different niches that it fills, right? It buffers. It takes away some of the energy from the waves. It's a habitat to many different fish. It's a food source for many different fishes. It releases oxygen into the ocean as it goes through photosynthesis as well. And it has a lot of different things that it can do for us, which are important, right? And it goes into some of our foods, toothpaste and ice creams, and I'm sure there's other things out there as well. So it's something you can put into your document. You do not have to add that, but you can if you want to make it more interesting. And then here's that Nature Boom Time video. If there's some facts in there that you hear, if you need to go back and listen to that, you're welcome to do that when we're doing our document as well. Again, here's that word again, biodiversity. Mollusks, fish, whales, crustaceans, bacteria. Bacteria and fungi are pretty much going to be found everywhere. So if an answer has bacteria and fungi, you might want to keep reading to make sure it lists other things. Sea anemones, clownfish. And we know that one of the adaptations you have to live in the ocean is you need to be able to live in what? Salt water. You have to be able to live in salt water because the ocean is a very salty place. Depending on where you are. how deep you go, the ocean can be cold and the pressure can be very high. If you live off the coast of Florida, dealing with cold water is probably not something you need to worry about, right? You're right there in the Gulf Stream, which is a warm current that runs around Florida and keeps the temperatures up there. You're not worried about cold water, but you have to adapt to warmer waters. If you live like up north, Canada and above, the waters are going to be colder, and you have to adapt to that. If you live on the West Coast, I know that when I stuck my feet in the ocean, it was like in the middle of summer, and I'm thinking, the ocean, it's hot. That ocean was cold, y'all. The Pacific Ocean is way colder than what I was used to. I'm like, I don't understand how these children are running around here. This is like ice water to me. It's just different. You have to be able to adapt to that depending on where you live. You don't need to memorize the ocean saltiness. Again, I'm really not going to get upset if Collins decides to put something about how the ocean can be more salty or less salty in her Google Doc. That's fine. The information's right here for you. It's important. There are questions that pop up every now and again about why the ocean could be more or less salty. It's not like it's going to be a bad thing if you add that in there. It's just not required. Now, coral reef, I don't think I have a very specific document for coral reef. And I'm going to be honest with you, coral reef, to me, is still part of the ocean, right? I mean, where do you find it? In the shallow parts of the ocean. It's just something that I needed to talk about for a little bit. And you'll notice there's only one slide. I need to talk about coral reefs for a little bit because if you see that in a question, I need to make sure all of us have at least seen it at least once and kind of understand what a coral reef is. All right, so if everybody's looking up here now, because unfortunately this can't be on your screen, but all I am in, I'm just in the Google Classroom. I'm under this week, week 6, 920 through 924. And you'll see some things in here that are very important. Number one, there's some Nearpod codes for you, so you can go back and forth in between the Nearpods if you need to get some information off the slides. You can watch videos if you need to do that as well. Here's a copy of Ecosystems number 5, vocabulary. So even if you say, Mr. Boland, you never gave that to me, yes, I did. It's right there. It's always there. You always have access to it. You'll notice a bunch of blank Google Docs: oceans, estuaries, grasslands, taiga, tundra, tropical rainforest. I'm being very hopeful that we get through all that. You have your Google Slides for this week, which I'll go ahead and open, and we'll come back to that in a second. The Google Sheets is probably the thing that we will do very last. I know it was on there last week. I had it on there just in case we got to it, Amanda, but we did not. And then I have an exemplar. This is an example document you can look at to make sure you are writing at least close enough to enough information on each biome that we have. So we've just studied oceans. We went over that. We reviewed it a little bit today. And here is what, again, when we're creating our documents for the different biomes that we end up linking in our app, we need to write about very specific things, the biotic and abiotic factors in each ecosystem. Now, of course, in the ocean, that varies, but that's fine. You do need to mention very specific biotic factors in all the ecosystems that we study so that you can start differentiating between the different ones. And then, again, sun, soil, temperature, and water are very important. So here's just you see how short this is, right? This is not some massive document, so don't go home trying to work for 8 hours on this because you don't need to. You should be able to get this finished in class very easy. Oceans are amazing biomes. One extremely unique abiotic factor in the oceans is that the water is salt water. Probably the most important abiotic factor in my opinion. It was funny when we talked about the definition of salt water because it was just too easy. Salt water is water with salt in it. When looking at the other 3 abiotic factors, sun, soil, and temperature, we have to remember that these 3 vary, there's that special vocabulary word, vary based on where they are and what time of year it is. Vary means to change. In the summer in North Carolina, the ocean temperatures are very different than they are in, let's say, January, aren't they? Right? So I wrote that. In the summer in North Carolina, the ocean temperature is pretty high. The sunlight is intense. The soil is sand. However, in the winter, the ocean temperatures are cold. The sunlight is not as intense because of the tilt of the earth and what season we are in. Colder areas like the Arctic always have cold ocean temperatures, and some of their soil is very rocky. When talking about biotic factors in an ocean, the first one that comes to mind for me is sharks because they're my favorite ocean animal. We learned about an amazing animal called a remora that hangs out with sharks. Do you remember learning about those? I would hope so. We only talk about like 10,000 times. A shark and a remora have, there must be too many spaces in that, have a commensalistic relationship, not commensalism, commensalistic relationship. That's because the remora gets a benefit from the relationship. The shark doesn't get anything, good or bad. Other biotic or living things you find in the ocean are dolphins, starfish, octopus, stingrays, jellyfish. And don't forget about the plants. One important algae is kelp. Kelp has many uses. It's a home to fish, a food source. It's a buffer that takes energy away from the waves and reduces beach erosion. That's literally everything that we just covered about oceans, isn't it? Just in 2 tiny little paragraphs. Is that super hard to do? It is not hard to do. Do you have to write it exactly like mine? No. Can you focus on completely different things about the ocean? Yes, but somewhere in there you should mention salt water. I mean, that's important. I mean, that's the most important abiotic factor. You might choose different biotic factors than I did, and that is okay. Okay, and we'll get into that here in just a little bit, because in the Google class here, if you scroll down, right here, I've given everyone your own specific copy of an oceans Google Doc. It's just blank. You're going to open it up and you'll start typing. If you need to go back and refer to my exemplar, you're welcome to. It is there for you to do so. Feel good about that? Again, you're here at school. Great thing for you is if you don't understand something, you put your hand up and I come over to your desk and I help you out. If you happen to be at home and you don't understand what I'm talking about because you didn't get it in this brief little instructions, like, you got to send me a message. You have to send me a message. It doesn't work any other way. Shayla has to go home for a week for some weird reason. She needs to email me, can you please explain what's going on? That way I can at least try my best to answer the questions. And we can work through those things. And some of you have done a great job of that. The second biome that we're going to work on today, and here's what we'll do. We'll probably work on our Google Docs for estuaries and oceans in class. And if we have more time, I'll make another video as we move forward. But I want to see how we do on this. Estuaries. This is something we've talked about pretty much since day one, right? It was on our morning work, and everybody's like, what's an estuary? And we talked about it. It's where rivers and oceans meet. And there's this mix of freshwater and saltwater called what, class? Holy cow, y'all need some coffee. Wake up. There's a mix of freshwater and saltwater called? Brackish water. Holy cow. Y'all need to get some sleep on the weekends. And it's a very interesting place, in my opinion. There's some crazy things that happen in estuaries. I like this part. If I were to write a Google Doc about an estuary, would I mention the word brackish? Yeah, probably so. It's probably one of the most important things about it. But it's also this nursery of the sea, because there are animals that come from the ocean that have their babies in the estuaries because it's a safer place for them to have their babies, and the water is still salty enough for them to live in, which is pretty interesting. Again, as we look through these slides, we start to realize, like, probably if you're looking at the abiotic factors, the most important one is the water type, right? Because the sun, the soil, and the temperature can vary depending on what season you're in and depending on where your estuary is. If your estuary is in North Carolina, it's going to be very, very different than if you find an estuary in, like, California, isn't it? Sun, soil, temperature, and water are going to be very, very different. Although it did say that the soil in estuaries, due to all the minerals and things being washed down and some of the plants dying and decaying once they get down there, makes the soil very rich, which is pretty awesome. We learned a lot about a lot of different things that live there. Now, there was one really, and to me, one really cool thing that lives there, other than like skunks and possums and river otters and things like that. And it was something that we had a Nature Boom Time video about, and it had very, very unique adaptations. Who remembers what that plant was? Brandon. It was the mangrove tree, which is right here. And again, all your notes are here, and you have an internet. Like, you can look up some other facts about the mangrove tree. And you can also go back and watch Charlie and his sister as they went through the mangrove there with the red mangroves and get some very interesting facts about mangroves, right? And how they interact with the oceans and the estuaries and help keep things running the way that they are supposed to. So again, that's our second Google Doc that we can get filled out today. So most definitely when we leave here today, we should have 2 Google Docs filled out, one on estuaries, one on oceans for certain. And the rest of that stuff in the Google Sheets is very, very easy to fill out for us. Very, very easy to fill out for us. And we stopped right there. And we will pick up here if we finish that in class. Smash the like button, subscribe, get me to 300 would be super awesome. I think somebody said I hit 200. I don't keep up with that at all. All right, guys, we'll see you later.